Hey Scrappers, it's Vanessa here with round 4 of the telephone hop, and hopefully you have checked out Crystal's layout, which I showed at the beginning of this video. That is what I'm taking my inspiration from. And if you've watched telephone hops in the past, you know we start out with someone who creates a layout and then we pass it down along the list of people playing along, and we see how much the layout changes as we go through each day. So Crystal sent me her layout, and then tomorrow Melissa will have her take on my layout up on her channel. So I'll have everyone's links below so that as the hop goes on, you can check out the beginning all the way through to the end of how the layouts turn out. And so the first thing that I'm doing here is I'm just showing you, these are all the pattern papers that I chose for this layout. So I'm just getting them all cut up for how I'm going to put them on my background. And what I ended up doing is the first thing that you saw was I have some rainbow washi, which I actually put on a piece of white cardstock, and then I went ahead and cut that in half, I cut that in half, and that's going to become part of my layers for my pattern papers to go on my background. And I'm starting the base of my background with this black cardstock, and then I have a piece of notebook paper which is going to act as my main two background papers, and then I have all of these bits and pieces that I cut up, and I'm going to layer them all up in a stack like you see here. And I'm kind of following along with Crystal's design, only I have flipped mine, and so I'm going to have this horizontal stack of papers here at the top of my layout. And so I'm just getting it all sort of laid out how I want it to look on the page. And once I'm happy with that, I do know I am going to cut those papers down so that they fit inside of that notebook paper, but I've brought in my photos so I can kind of get the placement of where those are going to be. So I have 2 photos and then 2 sort of print screens of some notes or some text that were put on a YouTube video, and so I just wanted to get the placement of my photos. Once I did that, I marked off where my photos and my papers were going to go, and I am going to work on the background of this notebook pattern paper. I'm taking a Shimmers, I believe this is Jenny B Blue, and I have pre-treated this notebook paper with some gesso, and so that would make it a lot easier to do my mixed media. I'm going to put the mixed media from the top left to the bottom right, and Crystal's layout also had mixed media, so I wanted to make sure I incorporated some of that as well into mine. And like I said, I've treated this with gesso, so I'm able to sort of work with this ink or with this spray and add some water and have the sort of ink move around on the page and not just seep right in, which is the advantage of adding gesso to your background before you start doing any mixed media. It's not going to be super intense. I keep it very sort of washed out. I just wanted to add that interest to the background, and so I'm just going to add some splatters here with this blue, blot it up a little bit. I'm going to bring my papers back and just make sure that you can actually see both the top mixed media and the bottom, and that I feel like there's enough that it'll be there, but it'll be kind of subtle. And so once I'm happy with that, I'm going to add just a few more splatters to the background just to make sure I've intensified the color and added a bit of interest. Once I have that done, I'm just going to let that put that off to the side to dry, and I'm going to start with putting all these pattern papers together like you saw me lay them out at the beginning. And typically I will cut this out of my videos, but I decided to leave it in. It didn't actually take that long with all of these pattern papers, so I am just going to layer up the patterns, and I'm just lining up that rainbow. And because I didn't have, it's not wide enough to go underneath that black pattern paper. That's why I had cut it in half, so I could have a bit to have peeking out of both sides of that pattern paper. So the layout that I'm doing today definitely has sort of a school theme to it, and so hence the sort of chalkboard looking black pattern paper with sort of math equations and things like that on it. And then I have a piece of text and some orange paper. And so I'm kind of not playing super themey, but I definitely have a sort of school theme going on for this page today. And so once I'm happy with all my layers and I'm looking at it and I'm trying to see if this needs to be cut off on the edge, and it does need to be trimmed up just a little bit, but I will do that. I'll end up doing that here in just a second. I'm going to bring my photos back, lay them down, and make sure that everything has stayed where I want it to be for this layout. Now, because I am doing a sort of school theme and it's sort of math related, because my photos are about my husband, and he's a teacher and he teaches Algebra 2, and so numbers of course play a big role in his teaching. And so I decided to pull out a stamp that was basically just numbers 0 through 9, and I'm just going to stamp that twice, I believe, on this background, again to add that interest and to incorporate those numbers onto my background. So I'm just using a Stampin' Up ink. I want to say this might be Marina Mist. If you need to know the color, just let me know and I will get it for you, but I believe that's the color that I was using. Now once I had that, I just cleaned off my Misty, and I am going to add one more stamp, which is just a star, and it's sort of like it's not a perfect star, it's sort of a text print star, and I'm just adding that again for that little bit of interest and texture to the background with that same blue color. So I kept it really simple with the stamping. It just adds a little something extra to the background. And now I'm just putting, again, my papers back so I can make sure that my stamping has sort of stayed where I needed it to be so that you'd actually be able to see what I was stamping. And so once I'm happy with that, my background is dry, I'm going to start to build out my embellishing for this layout. I did decide on that text paper to go ahead and put a notebook punch, just again to kind of drive home that sort of school theme that I'm going with. And the first thing that I decided to do, because I wanted to make sure I had room for placement of my title, I went ahead and put my title down on the page. The title for this one is Coolest Teacher Ever. And so while you kind of start to watch me build out my clusters here, I figure I will tell you a little bit about these photos. So these photos are actually from YouTube, and when the whole pandemic started and schools sort of it was decided that the teachers were not going to go back to school after March break here where I live, the kids would start doing virtual school for the rest of the year. And so my husband, being a Algebra 2 teacher, he obviously then had to start teaching school at home, and he decided that one way to sort of keep his kids engaged a bit more was for some of his lessons, not all of them, but for some of his lessons, he would teach them in a virtual VR world. And so there had been a game that had been released that most kids know the name of, and so part of that is there's these windows and there's these magic markers that are in the game that would allow him to write on the windows his math lessons. So he was able to set it up so he could teach his math lessons to his kids in this virtual world. And his kids, of course, thought that was like the coolest thing ever. And so they've posted it in like a game thing. So I know a couple of his videos had like more than 1,000 hits of people who had come and seen what it was he was doing to sort of engage his kids during this kind of crazy time that everybody was going through. And so I just wanted to make sure I documented that because I thought it's pretty cool what he was doing and how he was sort of getting his kids engaged in still learning even though they weren't in the classroom. And so that is what I'm documenting here in these pictures. And as I've been talking, I've just been building out those clusters. And I'm just using a whole bunch of bits and pieces from my stash. I have some stars and some of the little word phrases are actually from a printable from Nicole Jones. I've added those into my clusters, sort of talking about the whole COVID sort of stay-at-home orders. And so for the finishing touch for this layout, I am just going to add some sequins because if you know any of Crystal's layout, they almost always include sequins. And so of course, because I am scrap lifting her for this one, I definitely was going to add sequins as my finishing touch. So like I said, this is for the telephone hop, and so please make sure you check out Melissa's layout tomorrow. And if you haven't checked out the other layouts, please go through and check where the layout started so that you can see how it looks by the time we get to the end. And other than that, I add these few sequins along the diagonal of my layout. I have my pictures and my title on, and with that, we are going to call this one done. So I hope you enjoyed. Here are the still photos, and guys, I will catch you on the next one. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.